The Harmattan wind arrived in Ayatoro before the sun did, carrying red dust that clung to roofs, throats, and unspoken grudges. By dawn, the village looked like an old photograph left too long in the sun, faded and restless. Roosters crowed with cracked confidence. Women swept compounds in slow circles. Somewhere, a radio hummed a gospel tune that promised miracles without explaining the cost. It was the kind of morning that pretended to be ordinary, even as it sharpened its knives. Ayatoro sat between a narrow river and a stubborn forest, a place where stories were currency and silence was suspicion. People here knew one another's shadows. They knew whose laughter was forced, whose prayers were bargains, whose generosity came with invisible strings. And they knew the Adesina's. The Adesina house stood apart, not because it was bigger, but because it had learned how to be noticed. Its walls were cream, freshly painted each year, a habit born from pride and reinforced by fear. A black gate, taller than necessary, guarded the entrance. Inside, the courtyard smelled lemon disinfectant and bitter cola. On the veranda, Chief Kunle Adesina sat with his walking stick laid across his knees like a boundary line no one dared cross. Kunle Adesina had once been a tall man. Now age had folded him inward, but not enough to soften his authority. His eyes were sharp, like they had been trained to catch lies before they grew legs. His beard, peppered white, framed a mouth that had signed documents and sentenced dreams. He had made his money in transport and politics, in seasons when roads were promises and promises were expensive. People said he had risen from nothing. People also said nothing had risen with him. Behind him, the house breathed. Somewhere inside, a woman cried quietly. Her name was Morenike Adesina, and she had learned to cry without making noise. Morenike had married Kunle at 20, believing stability was the same as love. Over the years, she had mastered the choreography of survival, when to speak, when to serve, when to vanish. This morning, her hands trembled as she folded a wrapper she had worn too many times for grief and not enough for celebration. Her eyes, once luminous, were now careful. She moved through the corridors like someone borrowing space. "Have you told them?" Kunle asked without turning. Morenike froze. The question hovered, heavy. "Not yet," she said. "Today, before rumors dress it better than we can." Outside the gate, rumors were already tying their shoes. A cluster of boys sat on a fallen tree near the road, their voices sharp with curiosity. A woman passing with a basin on her head slowed, listening. The name on everyone's tongue was Sade. Sade, who lived at the edge of the forest. Sade, who wore her poverty like a borrowed coat. Sade, whose daughter had eyes too bright for the world she had inherited. Sade's house was a two-room structure patched with zinc and hope. When it rained, the floor learned new shapes. When it was dry, dust ruled. She woke before the birds, tying her headscarf tight, pulling on strength like a garment she couldn't afford to remove. Today she did not go to the market. Today she stood at the doorway and watched the road. Beside her stood her daughter, Zainab. Zainab was 14 and too observant for her age. She had learned early that adults hid truths in plain sight, that smiles could be doors and doors could be traps. Her hair was braided neatly, a discipline Sade insisted on, as if order could ward off hunger. Her eyes followed everything. "Mama," Zainab said softly, "people are staring." "They always do," Sade replied. "Keep your back straight." The night before, a letter had arrived. It came without a stamp, folded twice, slipped under the door like a confession that did not want to be seen. Sade had read it by kerosene light, her breath shallow, her heart loud. The words were simple. The meaning was not. "Come to the Adesina house by noon. Bring the girl." No signature, No explanation. Sade knew what the village would think. She knew what Kunle Adesina's name did to conversations. She knew the math of power. But she also knew something else, something older than fear, something she had buried for 14 years. She had once loved Kunle Adesina. It was a lifetime ago, when Kunle's ambition had still been tender, when promises sounded like songs instead of contracts. She was young, hopeful, reckless enough to believe affection could protect her from consequence. When she told him she was pregnant, his silence was a verdict. When Morenike's engagement was announced, Sade understood the geography of loss. She had left Ayatoro then, returned years later with a child and a spine hardened by absence. She had never asked for anything. She had never told anyone the truth. Until now. By mid-morning, the sun pressed down like an accusation. The road to the Adesina house filled slowly, not with invitation, but with expectation. People found reasons to pass by. A goat wandered too close and was chased away. Children were shooed, then lingered. The air thickened with the smell of palm oil and anticipation. Inside the compound, Kunle stood, adjusting his abada, choosing dignity like a weapon. Morenike watched Kunle, searching his face for something she could trust. She found resolve. She found fear. She did not find remorse. "Remember," Kunle said, "this ends today." When Sade and Zainab reached the gate, the murmurs sharpened. The gatekeeper hesitated, then opened the black mouth wide. Zainab squeezed her mother's hand. The courtyard seemed too clean, too bright. Every step echoed. Kunle turned as they approached. Time folded. Sade met his eyes and did not look away. "This is the girl," Kunle said, his voice steady. "Yes," Sade replied. "This is my daughter." Silence stretched, thin and dangerous. Kunle lifted his chin. "He will stay here," he said. "She will be educated, provided for. No one needs to know why." Morenike inhaled sharply. Zainab's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. Sade felt the old anger stir, the old love ache, the old fear stand up and demand to be counted. She looked at Kunle, at the house, at the watching eyes beyond the gate. "No," she said. The word fell like a stone. Kunle's expression hardened. "You will regret this." Sade shook her head. "I already have, but not for this." She turned to her daughter. "Zainab, stand tall." Zainab lifted her chin, her heart pounding. The dust outside refused to settle, and Ayatoro leaned closer, sensing that whatever had begun would not end quietly. The wind shifted. Somewhere a radio changed songs, and the day took a breath, preparing for what it would demand next. By afternoon, the Harmattan sun had climbed high enough to erase mercy from shadows. In Ayatoro, news did not travel, it multiplied. By the time Sade and Zainab returned to their small house near the forest, the story had already grown legs, a tail, and teeth. Some said Sade had gone to beg. Others said she had gone to collect blood money. A few whispered something far more dangerous. "The girl looks like him." Zainab felt it first at the well. As she lowered the bucket, laughter stopped too abruptly to be coincidence. Two girls stared, then turned away, pretending to adjust their wrappers. An older woman clicked her tongue, the sound sharp with judgment. Zainab's reflection wavered in the water, her eyes, her nose, the stubborn set of her mouth. She straightened her back, just as her mother had taught her. At home, Sade sat on the wooden stool, unmoving. The letter lay unfolded on the table, its creases softened by her fingers. She had not expected Kunle Adesina to move so quickly, or so boldly. "Mama, what will happen now?" Zainab asked. Sade did not answer immediately. She listened to the village breathe. The distant shout of a hawker, the bark of a dog, the gossip curling like smoke. Then she spoke. "Now," she said, "we prepare." Preparation for Sade did not mean running, it meant remembering. That night she lit a candle and opened a small metal box she had not touched in years. Inside were photographs browned with age, a hospital slip folded into obedience, and a necklace Kunle had given her once, when he still smiled without calculation. She touched none of them. She simply acknowledged their presence, like ghosts that had waited patiently. Zainab watched from the doorway. "Mama," Zainab said carefully, "is Chief Adesina my father?" The candle flickered. Sade closed her eyes. 14 years of silence cracked. "Yes," she said. The word was heavy. It was sharp. Zainab did not cry. She did not shout. She sat down slowly, as if gravity had increased without warning. "But he said I should stay there," Zainab whispered. He didn't say he was my father." "He won't, not unless it benefits him." Across the village, Moreniki Adesina sat alone in the sitting room, her wrapper loosened, her face pale. The echo of Kunle's voice still bounced off the walls. "She will stay here." It had not been a request, it had been a strategy. For years, Moreneki had carried a quiet suspicion like a pebble in her shoe. Kunle's absences, his sudden generosity to strangers, the way his eyes avoided certain names. But suspicion was easier to manage than truth. Now truth had walked into her courtyard with braided hair and familiar eyes. She poured herself water and did not drink. "Provided for, no one needs to know why." The words rang like a sentence. That evening, Kunle returned late, his face carved into purpose. He found Moreneki waiting. "You embarrassed me today," she said. "You embarrassed yourself," he replied. She stood. "Is the girl your child?" Kunle did not hesitate. "Yes." The confession landed without apology. Moreneki staggered back, gripping the table. "All these years," she whispered, "all these prayers." "She is my responsibility," he said. "This ends it." "No," Moreneki said. "This begins it." The next morning, the village crier's gong rang before dawn. A meeting was called. Men gathered under the iroko tree. Women stood behind them, arms folded, eyes sharp. Children climbed walls and trees. Kunle arrived dressed in authority. Sade arrived dressed in truth. Zainab stayed home. The village head cleared his throat. "We hear troubling things." Kunle spoke first. "I am offering help to a struggling family, education, shelter." Sade stepped forward. "You are offering silence." Gasps rippled. Sade said, "She is my daughter, and I will not trade her truth for comfort." The word daughter cracked open the air. All eyes turned. Kunle smiled thinly. "Proof?" Sade reached into her wrapper and brought out the hospital slip, then the photographs, then the necklace. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. The village head leaned forward. From the edge of the crowd, someone laughed, bitter, familiar. It was Kunle's younger brother, Tunde, a man who had always lived in Kunle's shadow and learned to resent its shape. "So it's true the mighty chief leaves seeds everywhere." Murmurs grew louder. Kunle's face darkened. "Enough." "No," the village head said, "not enough." By noon, the story had changed again. Now it was not about charity. It was about inheritance. Whose blood? Whose name? Whose future? That evening, a stone hit Sade's roof, then another. A voice shouted, "Witch!" Zainab trembled. Sade pulled her close. "Do not be afraid," she whispered, though fear sat beside them as an uninvited guest. Across the village, Kunle sat alone in his study, staring at a mirror. For the first time in years, his reflection did not obey him. Outside, the Harmattan wind returned, lifting dust, carrying secrets that had learned to walk. And somewhere between anger and destiny, Ayatoro began to choose sides. The rain came without warning. One moment Ayatora was wrapped in dry Harmattan breath. The next, clouds tore open and poured their secrets onto the red earth. Roofs rattled, gutters overflowed, children screamed with delight, then scattered. Rain in Ayatora was never just weather, it was a verdict. At Sade's house, water crept across the floor in thin, cold fingers. She lifted the mattress onto bricks, her movements quick, practiced. Zainab stood at the doorway, watching the rain blur the world into something unfamiliar. "Mama," she said, "do you think he will come again?" Sade did not answer right away. She listened to the rain beat against zinc like a warning drum. "He already has," she said. "He just hasn't crossed the threshold." Across the village, Kunle Adesina's compound glistened, untouched by flood. Drainage systems he had paid for worked efficiently, carrying excess away. He watched from the veranda, the rain reflected in his eyes. For the first time, he felt the weight of something he could not divert. Zainab's face haunted him, not as a problem, but as a mirror. He had spent years building legacies out of land and influence, forgetting that blood carried its own memory. Inside the house, Moreneki packed a small bag. She folded clothes carefully, choosing the ones that reminded her who she had been before becoming an appendix to power. When Kunle entered, she did not look up. "You are going somewhere?" he asked. "To my sister's," she replied. "I need air." "This is not the time," he said. "This is exactly the time," she answered. Kunle watched her leave, the door closing softly behind her. The sound echoed louder than any argument. He sat down heavily, his authority suddenly too large for the room. Outside, thunder rolled. The next day, the village school reopened after the rain. Zainab walked there alone, her sandals splashing through puddles, her mind heavy with questions she did not yet know how to ask. At the gate, she hesitated. Children stared. Whispers followed her like shadows. In the classroom, a teacher paused when Zainab entered. "Find a seat," she said, too carefully. Zainab sat. She opened her book. The words swam. At break time, a boy leaned over. "My mother says you are a chief's mistake." Laughter followed. Zainab closed her eyes. That afternoon, Kunle received a visitor. Tunde arrived unannounced, his smile sharp. "Brother," he said, "the village is restless." "Say what you want," Kunle replied. "I want what is fair," Tunde said. "You have one acknowledged son in the city. Now this girl appears. Blood is blood." Kunle's jaw tightened. "She will not touch what she has not earned." Tunde laughed. "That's not how the ancestors see it." That night, Sade dreamed. She stood by the river, holding Zainab's hand. The water rose dark and deep. On the other side, Kunle called out, his voice splitting into many. Zainab stepped forward, her hand slipping from Sade's grasp. Sade awoke with a cry. Zainab sat up. "Mama?" Sade pulled her close. "Promise me," she whispered, "that no matter what they say, you will remember who you are." Zainab nodded, though she did not yet know how. 2 days later, the village head sent word. Kunle Adesina was to present Zainab formally as his child or deny her publicly. There would be witnesses, there would be consequences. The day of the declaration arrived wrapped in heat. The iroko tree stood silent, its leaves unmoving. The village gathered, tension thick as palm oil. Kunle stood before them, his abaya immaculate. Sade stood opposite him, Zainab at her side. Moreneki was not there. Kunle cleared his throat. "This girl is my blood, but she will not bear my name." Gasps. "She will be sponsored," he continued, "educated, but she will remain where she is." Sade laughed, a sound edged with pain. "You want the benefits of truth without its burden." The village head raised his staff. "And the girl?" All eyes turned to Zainab. Her heart pounded. Her mother's hand trembled in hers. She stepped forward. "My name is Zainab Sade," she said clearly. "I belong to my mother." Silence fell. Kunle's face flushed. Something shifted, ancient and irreversible. Blood had spoken, and Ayatoro understood that the story was no longer Kunle's to control. After Zainab spoke, Silence did not end, it fermented. Ayatoro did not disperse quickly that day. People lingered under the iroko tree as though the earth itself might explain what had just happened. Kunle Adesina stood frozen, his authority bruised in public. Sade felt the tremor in her legs, but refused to sit. Zainab's words echoed louder than the village gong. I belong to my mother. That night, Kunle did not sleep. He sat in his study, surrounded by certificates, plaques, framed photographs of handshakes with men whose names opened doors. None of them looked back at him now. The house was too quiet without More Inikeji's restrained footsteps, too honest without her silence to lean on. For the first time, Kunle considered what it meant to be remembered. Not the roads he had influenced, not the favors he had traded, but the child who had rejected his name in front of everyone who feared him. In Sade's house, fear finally arrived without disguise. A goat was slaughtered nearby, its scream cutting the night too sharply. Footsteps passed their window and did not stop. Zainab lay awake, counting her breaths. Sade sat with her back to the door, a pestle within reach, her eyes trained on the darkness. "Mama," Zainab whispered, "did I do wrong?" Sade shook her head. "You did something dangerous," she said gently, "and sometimes that looks like wrong to people who benefit from silence." The danger came in the morning. The school sent Zainab home. No explanation, no argument, just a quiet instruction from the headmistress. Let things cool down. Sade understood the language. Cooling down often meant freezing out. She walked Zainab home through eyes that watched too closely, mouths that whispered too freely. When they reached the house, Sade made a decision she had avoided for years. She would leave Ayatoro. But leaving required resources, and resources attracted attention. Sade went to the women's cooperative by the market, hoping to borrow against future earnings. The leader, a woman she had once helped during childbirth, would not meet her eyes. "It is not personal," the woman said. "Times are sensitive. Sensitive to power, sensitive to money, sensitive to Kunle Adesina." By afternoon, Kunle received another visitor. This time it was the village head himself. "You are losing control," the old man said plainly. "I am containing chaos." "You are creating it," the head replied. "Blood denied rots differently." Kunle stood. "What do you want?" The old man's eyes were steady. A public acknowledgement, full name protection. Kunle laughed, harsh and short. "You want me to crown my disgrace?" The old man said, "I want you to survive it." That evening, Tunde struck. He called a family meeting, unofficial but loud. Cousins arrived, uncles spoke, women cried into wrappers. The language of tradition was sharpened into a weapon. If she is your blood, then she is entitled. If she is not, then she is a lie. You cannot sit between. Kunle felt the walls closing in, not with fists, but with expectations older than law. The next morning, Zainab disappeared. Not kidnapped, not taken by force. Gone. Sade returned from fetching water to an empty house and a note placed carefully on the stool. "She is safe. Come alone." The handwriting was familiar. Kunle's. Sade did not scream. She did not cry. She walked. The Adesina gate opened as if it had been waiting. Inside, Zainab sat on the veranda, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, her eyes wide but dry. Kunle stood behind her, rigid. "I needed to speak to her," he said. Sade stepped forward, fury controlled by terror. "You do not take children to make points." Kunle's voice broke slightly. She is my child too." "No," Sadeh said. "You are learning too late what that means." Zainab stood. She walked to her mother and took her hand. "I am not afraid," she said quietly, "but I don't want to stay here." Something in Kunle cracked. He looked at his daughter, not as property, not as inheritance, but as consequence. For the first time, power abandoned him. Outside the gate, Ayatoro waited. And inside, Kunle Adesina understood that the price of a name was no longer negotiable. The night after Zainab returned home, Ayatoro did not sleep. The village lay stretched between expectation and fear, like a drum pulled too tight. Dogs barked at shadows. Lamps burned longer than usual. Somewhere, a child cried and was hushed too quickly. The earth itself seemed to be listening. Kunle Adesina sat alone in his compound, the borrowed shawl Zainab had worn folded neatly on the table before him. It felt heavier than any document he had ever signed. He touched it once, then withdrew his hand, as though the cloth might accuse him. For the first time in decades, Kunle prayed without bargaining. He prayed without offering projects, titles, or sacrifices that could be counted. He prayed like a man who had run out of leverage. At dawn, Moranikiji returned. She arrived quietly, her small bag slung over her shoulder, her face stripped of illusion. Kunle looked up in surprise. "I heard," she said simply. He nodded. "I failed." "Yes," she replied, "but failure is not the end. Lying is." She sat across from him. "What are you going to do?" Kunle stared at the floor. "What I should have done 14 years ago." The message went out before noon, another village meeting. This time, the summons carried no ambiguity. People gathered faster than before. Even those who claimed indifference found themselves drawn toward the Iroko tree. Something final hung in the air. Sadeh arrived with Zainab. They walked together, not hurried, not defiant, just present. Kunle arrived last. He wore no cap. The village head raised his staff, then lowered it without ceremony. "Speak," he said. Kunle stepped forward. His voice when it came was not the voice Ayatoro knew. "My name is Kunle Adesina, and this is my daughter Zainab." The murmur that followed was not shock, it was release. "She will bear my name if she chooses," Kunle continued. "She will inherit as my blood demands. I wronged her mother. I wronged my wife. I wronged this village by thinking power could replace truth." He turned to Sadeh. "I am sorry." The words were plain, no decoration, no defense. Kunle turned to Moranikiji. "I will not ask for forgiveness I have not earned, but I will not hide again." Moranikiji nodded once, tears standing but not falling. The village head leaned on his staff. And the girl? All eyes turned to Zainab. Zainab stepped forward, her heart beating hard but steady. "I am Zainab," she said. "I have a mother who raised me with truth. I have a father who is learning how to tell it. I will not be used to punish or reward anyone." She paused. "I will take my father's name," she continued, "but I will keep my mother's strength." Silence followed, not empty, but full. The Iroko leaves rustled, though there was no wind. What happened next surprised everyone. Tunde laughed, not mocking, not bitter, just tired. Blood has spoken, let it rest. The tension that had knotted the village loosened thread by thread. But resolution did not mean peace, not yet. In the weeks that followed, consequences arrived like delayed thunder. Contracts were questioned. Allies stepped back. Kunle Adesina learned what it meant to stand without borrowed shadows. Some nights he wondered if truth had ruined him. Then he would see Zainab reading under a tree, her face lit by something quieter than ambition, and he would know it had saved him. Sadeh made another decision. She did not move into the Adesina house. She did not accept gifts that came with expectations. Instead, she took a small loan, approved this time without hesitation, and expanded her trading business. She hired 2 women who once avoided her gaze. Power, she had learned, changed direction when confronted with steadiness. Zainab returned to school. The whispers faded. Children adjusted faster than adults. Soon she was just Zainab again, bright, observant, unafraid to ask difficult questions. Sometimes she visited her father. Sometimes she didn't. Choice, she discovered, was its own inheritance. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the village in gold, Kunle stood at the edge of his compound and watched the road. Sadeh and Zainab passed by, walking home together. Zainab waved. Kunle raised his hand. He did not call out. He did not summon. He let the moment be what it was. Enough. Years later, when people told the story of Ayatoro, they did not speak first of scandal or shame. They spoke of the day a powerful man removed his cap, of a woman who refused silence, of a girl who chose herself. And they said this: the earth remembers truth, even when people try to bury it.
Life has a way of circling back to what we try hardest to hide. In this story, power could delay truth, but it could not erase it. Wealth could build walls, but not silence blood. And fear could control people, but never forever. The lesson is simple, yet demanding. What you deny today will confront you tomorrow with interest. Integrity costs something. Truth exposes. Responsibility humbles. But in the end, truth is cheaper than regret. If you are a parent, let this remind you that children are not mistakes to be hidden, but lives to be honored. If you are a leader, remember that authority without accountability is only noise. If you are struggling, know this: your worth is not defined by who claims you, but by who you choose to become. Live honestly. Choose courage over convenience, and never trade your truth for temporary comfort. If this story moved you, let it move you to reflection and to action, because somewhere, right now, the earth is listening.
And if you find any value in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more contents like this. Thank you.